Okay, hello and welcome. My name is Brian and I will be your host for this first episode of the Millennial Minute. In this episode I want to attempt to break down socialism as an economic system. To further simplify things for myself, I'm going to kind of focus on the issue that seems to be most popular with people nowadays, and that's whether or not North America should transition to socialism. I think to understand the economic framework of that type of socialism, you have to first understand two other prominent economic systems. So then on one side of that you would have a capitalist market, and then I'm going to talk about the most pure form of a capitalist market, and then on the other end you have communism, which again I'm going to talk about the most pure form of communism. So to start with capitalism basically is like a free market system, and it's kind of defined by the fact that the self-interest of the people in the economy, like the consumer, the business owner, kind of naturally allocate resources through a sense of natural competition and to meet supply and demand. And again, like I said, the self-interest of the rational consumer in theory creates a system that is self-regulating in terms of allocating all the resources in the economy. The theory is that it's self-sustaining. You don't need any other external intervention aside from the rational consumers within that economy to completely and successfully regulate and allocate all the resources in the economy. And again, that would be the most purest form of capitalism, and that's kind of like the essence of the idea. And then when you talk about communism, it's essentially kind of like the opposite. Communism is like you have one entity, like whether it be like a monarch or like a ruling family or even like a government system. Like the one system and one group basically allocates the resources for the economy. And the strength of a communist economy is that if that one group's or that one entity, so to speak's ability to forecast and meet the needs of the economy determines not only their success but like essentially in the bottom line like their survival as an economy. Because when you're talking about pure communism, you're talking about like that one entity allocate everything from like food to like of course healthcare and education and even like what jobs people have and how much they make. So in a communist economy where the need and the skills are matched and everything is kind of put together correctly, that can be a very powerful thing. However, the key difference between that and capitalism, well, the major difference is that communism is certainly not self-sustaining in terms of the fact that it comes from that one ruling entity. The rule they make is the rule in the economy. Capitalism is kind of like there is no rule, like just the self-interest of people, whether they even realize it or not, is what determines the outcome. So that's the two kind of opposing key systems. So then the question becomes, what is socialism? So basically socialism is kind of like, and for the proposed system in North America, it's like a mixture of both. And when I say mixture of both, like capitalism, communism, I'm not talking like a perfect half and half blend, but it's kind of like, you have a capitalist market where, there's things that are kind of allocated by like, natural competition, the free market system. And then there's going to be like a change where there's universal healthcare and then universal education. And that type of system in itself is kind of outside. It's outside of the free market framework because it's distributed. This is important. It's distributed and it's allocated by one entity. In this case, it would be the government. It wouldn't be like, people start a hospital or people start like a school and like, people choose. It's like the system is like, it's either kind of free up to interpretation or like, one entity decides the interpretation of like what people how people choose to go after the resource, so to speak. So I mean, essentially, like, I mean, in socialism it's kind of broad, so there's definitely like other components to it, but in terms of, you know, like what we're proposing for North American socialism, like that's kind of basically the nuts and bolts of it. So, you know, for me, for me, that's like the interesting part, is to kind of break down the economics of it and to really kind of understand what you're wanting, like in terms of like if you want to go vote or whatever. But you know, so I guess to kind of summarize that, like when you're making your decision, basically what you're choosing is whether or not you're gonna maintain like a capitalist system, or whether you're gonna want the new interjection of a socialist system for two industries, so to speak, in the economy. So yeah, so that's kind of like, I guess, a summary of what it is. And I guess obviously people are going to want to, they're going to want me to maybe address the issue of what's most important to people, is like whether or not socialism is going to work in this country. And obviously, like, you know, I'm not going to dig too deep into the argument itself, because for me that's almost like, the argument is almost like the sugar on top of the bread, so to speak. Like the bread's the part that fills you up, so that's the part you gotta know what it's made of. But sugar's not unimportant. But so basically, like, the people that obviously favor socialism and think it's good, you know, they point to like Canada or like different countries within Europe that have adopted forms of socialism. And then on the other side, there's the people that want to keep the version of capitalism we have the same, and I'll add this in there too. You know, in terms of healthcare, at least, we already have like Medicaid, Medicare, so even that in a way is kind of outside of a traditional free market capitalist system. But for all practical purposes, and even in the study of economics, the U.S. economy is considered a capitalist economy. So anyway, getting back to the fact that people who favor capitalism, they kind of give the opposite side of it. They say we're going to end up like Venezuela, and that's kind of like the fear that they put out there, and they say that like if we go to socialism, that's going to be the outcome. And so either way, both sides kind of have like a tangible like example, so to speak, to point to and say, well, you know, that's socialism, so we're going to end up like this, and that's also socialism, so we're going to end up like this. You know, and the reality of it is like we haven't, until we do it or either don't do it, we don't really know. But there is one thing that kind of stood out to me when I was learning about kind of different economic systems and socialism and capitalism and, you know, even communism, is that throughout history, a lot of socialism is actually not really a new concept, and it's been around for a while. And capitalism and socialism itself kind of they have an intimate relationship, but it's never kind of been like so much of a, it's kind of like a dysfunctional relationship, because socialism and capitalism a lot of times like exist together. Like socialism is kind of capitalism in a way, and it's not completely communism, but essentially, just to kind of pinpoint in on the point that I'm trying to make, is like throughout history, if you look at countries that have transitioned to socialism, in almost every situation there was some original system they had that was not socialism, that for whatever the reason they didn't like it, it wasn't working. There was like an inequality, or like there was a social civil unrest that made them think, well, we need to take an aspect outside of that system and interject it to fix what we don't like about this system. And then I put it that way because in many instances the system was a capitalist system. And I guess kind of like the main issue that actually came up that changed a lot of these societies was the situation in capitalism that has to do with ownership and like I guess even, so to speak, inheritance. But basically any situation that kind of created, like when it created a wealth gap, that situation bubbled over and made people in the capitalist system seek out more control from like a socialist, communist type entity, to kind of, so to speak, break up that version of what was perceived as the free market that wasn't working. So, I mean, I guess to throw it in there for people that like favor capitalism and think it's working and think it's good and they don't want it to be changed, that's kind of one thing to notice, is that in every economy that had like that transition to socialism, and the wealth gap was like the reason why they did it in a lot of instances in history. So it's kind of, I mean, and obviously for like Europe and stuff, it kind of turned out good, but I mean, they had some pretty dirty revolutions that was like their transition to socialism, but it happened kind of a while ago. And then obviously Venezuela, we have yet to see. I mean, it's pretty bad right now, but we have yet to see. They could fix what's going on over there, and then they could not. For a lot of people, they're suffering right now, so they kind of need to be fixed immediately. But either way, I mean, basically, like, it's just whatever best resonates with you, and if you feel that you like a free market system, then every system, even a free market system, has rules. I guess I'll just kind of end with this analogy, because in capitalism we all talk about the big pie and getting your piece of the pie, and I guess when you do that, the way I look at it is kind of like you have a pie and it's on the table and everybody wants a piece because they're hungry and it tastes super good, but in a way you kind of got to remember that, like, when you cut your piece, for instance, don't like leave frosting all over the table, or like, there may be people waiting in line. You don't want to kind of push people out of the way. You just got to, there's, even in the system where everything should be allocated naturally, there's still kind of like an etiquette, so to speak. And if, for instance, like if you don't put the pie back in the fridge, the pie is going to spoil, and then once the pie spoils, nobody gets any of the pie at all. So in a way, like when it comes to economic systems, it's created by people and it's maintained by people. So really the system itself almost is just a framework, and what determines the outcome is the people in the economy. So anyway, to avoid being too long-winded, I hope that was interesting, or you got something out of it. Anyway, that's my first episode, and it was titled "What is Socialism?" And I guess I hope to see you guys soon for future videos.